Hi again, everyone. Patrick Pfingsten here. I write the Illinoize political newsletter, which you can read every day at theillinoize.com, ILLINOIZE. Welcome back to our sort of kind of almost weekly podcast. This week, a conversation with former state representative, former state senator, the 2022 Republican nominee for governor, Darren Bailey, who is running again and seen as the favorite to be the GOP nominee for governor again in the March 17th primary. We're inviting all of the Republican candidates to come on this show and on our radio show, and expected to talk to Ted Dabrowski next week. We'll see what else happens in terms of that field, but we'll have a long conversation with Darren Bailey for you in the program today. We'll also talk to Ben Szalinski of Capital News Illinois, who has talked to all of the Republican candidates for governor, as well as been covering the Bears mess over at the State House, which is where we'll start this episode of our show, as Indiana and Illinois are in a sort of arms race to try to either keep the Chicago Bears in the state of Illinois, or if you're the state of Indiana, try and lure the professional football team across the state line into Hammond, Indiana. In Indiana's final week of their legislative session this week, they finalized their bill package to raise taxes by $1 billion to help build the Bears a stadium in Hammond, Indiana, right across the border, some mile and a half from the BP oil refinery in Whiting. Lovely. That the Bears are interested in, it seems, have not signed a deal on, say they're doing site work and that sort of thing. And Illinois, having been kind of pushed into a corner by Indiana in the last few weeks, has moved a property tax bill that would freeze property tax rates for that Bears Stadium site out in Arlington Heights for something like 20 years, and allow them to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes, PILOT, pilot bill that would allow them to have some of that tax certainty that they've asked for. Problem is, long way to go to make that bill law. Even though it got out of committee this week, doesn't sound like there are enough House Democrats on board to pass that at this point, and the war of words is sort of kicked up. Here's Indiana Governor Mike Braun on ESPN's Pat McAfee show this week talking about the process.
So you got to look at how long the Bears were trying to talk to their own state and their city. That goes back like 3 years. So for 2.5 years, they were just like, we're not interested, I think, assuming that it would just happen there. But to get something done, even though that lease goes through where they'll be playing there, for several more years, their clock was starting to run out to get it planned for a new stadium. So they came to us. We didn't try to lure them because they thought there was no interest, and they were being told bluntly, you got to build your own stadium. We're not putting any taxpayer dollars into it. So we never got ahead of our skis. I wanted to make sure it was an honest broker. We were talking.
As opposed to being used for leverage, which is certainly going to happen in business.
And that can happen at any time along the way on a real estate deal.
Agreed.
Therefore, before we went to, I guess, last week, when they made that strong statement and our bill passed through the House, that was kind of a threshold point. So when that happened, it was far enough along to where we believe it's mostly due diligence to just get the I's dotted, T's crossed, month and a half or two, and then you ink a final deal.
And here's Governor Pritzker earlier this week talking about the status of the negotiations.
I'm very interested to see how the people of Indiana and the voters of Indiana feel about the massive increases in taxes that are being proposed, about paying for a stadium in Indiana for the Chicago Bears. Do they want to raise their taxes to pay for a stadium in the state of Indiana for the Chicago Bears? We'll see. So that's a question for people who live in Indiana. Here in Illinois, we continue to have really positive discussions with the Chicago Bears, and I think you're going to see progress over time here. But importantly, I'm a Chicago Bears fan, believe very much that they ought to be based in Illinois, and I'm going to do everything I can without harming the taxpayers of the state of Illinois in the process of making sure that we can do everything we can to keep them in the state. All I can say is that the Bears are a private business. They are going to have to make this decision for themselves. We are obviously in conversation with them to give them the opportunity to stay in the state of Illinois. I really don't know, whether they will choose to move out of the state. I think, frankly, there are some fans here wearing Bears jerseys who agree with me that they should be in Illinois and they should choose Illinois, but that's really going to be up to them.
The reality is this has sucked up all of the oxygen at the State House so far this spring. It'll quiet down for a little while, but it sounds like the pressure is ramping up because of this Indiana bill, and the Bears want to make a decision. So we're either going to have to probably see some progress on the Illinois side soon, or the team that's been in Illinois for 100 years could cross over into Indiana. Let's get to our conversation with Darren Bailey, the Republican candidate for governor. He is a former state representative, former state senator, the 2022 Republican nominee for governor in the state of Illinois, and the frontrunner to be the Republican nominee for governor in 2026. He is State Senator Darren Bailey, former State Senator Darren Bailey. Senator, how are you?
Hey, I'm blessed today. Thank you so much for having me on.
So there seems to be this talk out there in political circles about this new and improved Darren Bailey, right? This kinder, gentler, softer teddy bear Darren Bailey. Is it real? Is this Darren Bailey with some cream cheese icing on top?
No, Patrick, I didn't make this up. We knew that my messaging had to be different, and when we began to explore this, even before when Cindy and I, first decided that we felt a calling to run, once we come to terms with Aaron Delmar, we had also a kind of Republican win, kind of downstate farmer win. But then to sit down with Aaron and some other really smart people and just talk about, okay, what went wrong in 22, my messaging, what is it? What is it that we talk about? What is it that we fix? Who do we talk with? What does Illinois have in common? So that's where it started. And what we announced 3 weeks, I think, before the tragedy. And then for the first time in my life, we were down 3 months, basically. Aaron and the team kept things going across the state. But Cindy and I and our family, Cindy will tell you, when we take off on a vacation, we used to take off on large trips across the U.S. with our children when they were growing up, and we'd be gone for 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks. And literally I could not wind down and usually until the end of that, because I've never really given myself, other than getting up early in the morning and spending an hour just reading and praying and thinking. There's not much downtime in my life, but this 3 months after the tragedy, we were just every night surrounded by family, friends, and there was a lot of time there just to read, to pray, to think. And I began, I don't know, when I went back out on the campaign trail, it wasn't, there was not a box here that says, new and improved, same flavor or anything. It just, I began hearing input from Chicago media that something's different. And honestly, until they started mentioning that, I guess I felt something different inside, because you've seen my Facebook lives. I get up on Monday mornings and see how many shootings and deaths were in Chicago, and kind of report and let the people know, gosh, this is terrible, what's going on. And to me at those times, these not even names, these numbers, these statistics, that's all they were, just statistics. And I realize now the brevity of life. I realize how, these are names, these are brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. And so it is with the people that are being impacted in Illinois. It's no longer just a story that I tell on the trail. This is somebody's life that matters. And I think that began to resonate over this 3 months, that life began to matter more. This mission that I have to want to work and improve the state became more purposeful. So no, I didn't go through any training to change anything. This is the feedback that I started hearing from mainly Chicago media. And I'm like, wow, maybe maybe, and as I began to reflect, I began to realize that, yeah, things are a little different, and I hope it's for the good.
We did a radio visit, before the first of the year, when you kind of step back onto the trail, about some of the personal stuff and the changes and what had happened with the loss of your son and daughter-in-law and two of the grandkids, and we'll put the link to that in the description for the folks who see this on YouTube, so they can hear that. But I will ask you this. I mean, as you keep getting farther from the pain and the rawness of that, how has it changed how you're approaching politics? Right, this you've been on the ballot every 2 years since 2018 now, and school boards before that, and I started running races in 2012, right? So, and covered them before that as a reporter. So we know that this is a blood sport, man, right? This is, people are out to hurt each other in this game, and I wonder, from your perspective and how you plan to change your mindset this time, how that tragedy, how what happened to your family makes you approach this campaign differently.
So I think my mindset is different. I think it has been changed. I mean, you got to understand, I grew up, I was raised, I was everything I talk about, everything I stood for, everything I argued and fought for as a state rep and a senator. I mean, I believe it's my life. But then to really understand and realize that, well, we got a pretty big state here, as it is with a nation or anything else. And, I learned some of that on the school board. I mean, you don't make a decision on the school board without ticking off, somebody else. You buy girls' basketball uniforms when the boys are irritated because they didn't get it. I got some of that, but that was local, and that could be contained and dealt with. But I think that, I want to be known for somebody that brings unity. I want to bring people together, and I understand I've been divisive in the past, and that's doing no one any good. I see what's taking place in DC. I see what's taking place in Springfield right now. People are love Trump, hate Trump, all these things they're talking about. All we're doing is spinning our wheels and living in our own echo chambers, and we're not accomplishing anything for the people. So, I think that that's probably one of the big things that I began to realize. I think back on my 2 years as a state rep and 2 years as a state senator, and I think I did a very good job representing the people of my district. But now looking at all the problems and honestly how much the divisiveness has escalated in the last 4 years, it's concerning to me. Quick story.
Sure.
When we were talking about remapping in 2019, as that began, 2019, 2020, I was in the House. And, I stood up at one point in time and I argued. I said, it's a shame. One of J.B. Pritzker's campaign promises was to bring in independent, fair mapping. And I argued that continually on the House floor. And eventually one of my Democrat colleagues stood up and he said, well, Representative Bailey, he said, let me take you back 10 years ago when the Republicans were in charge. Where was fair, independent mapping then? And, he had a good point. We talk about things. At some point in time, something's got to change. Someone's got to change it. Someone's got to push in a new era. And this divisiveness is dangerous. And I want to try to do something about that and usher in a new era of just attempting to get along. And I think that at the end of the day, when we focus on affordability, safety, and education, we got a lot of work to do in those three areas. If everybody will come to the table and we begin working with that, I think we'll start understanding each other all across this state better.
I want to spend the majority of our time talking about this campaign and the campaign for the fall, but I do think we need to look back, right? If we're going to see a redo of 2022 of or at least a rematch, I don't think you'd want a redo of what happened, but I think there are a lot of people who, when you started talking about getting in the race right around State Fair, right, is about the time I heard your name pop up. I think a lot of people dismissed that as kind of the been there, done that. He can't beat Pritzker. He can't appeal in the suburbs. And the numbers last time around showed it, right? You did not perform well in the suburbs or in suburban Cook. And there, simply aren't enough votes downstate to overcome that hole that you put yourself into. What went wrong last time and how do you fix it this time?
Well, when you consider my performance, I mean, I drastically outperformed Bruce Rauner 4 years earlier. I had 2 more points than he did in Chicago. So I think apathy has set in. I honestly, did I do anything to unite people in the last go around? No, we were focused on social and moral issues coming out of COVID. And, quite honestly, the rest of the state didn't agree with that. But I don't think that I don't attribute the low voter turnout to my candidacy. I just think because we have the elections right after and before when we're electing, school board members and such, and goodness, they've been at 10, 15% turnout. So a 43% turnout was shocking. But, this younger generation, when I've had conversations with them over the last 4 years and talking about the importance of getting out to vote, we've got a generation who feels like they are rebelling against government, against the system if they simply don't vote. And it's costing us and it's hurting us. So I think that I know, looking at data, that if we can, if simple voter turnout, even above and beyond governor candidates' messaging, a voter turnout of 55 to 60% outside of Cook and Collier counties, and then capturing 25 to 28% of the vote within those areas, that's the recipe for a win. And then you've got someone like J.B. Pritzker, who just continues. I mean, he's offering things to us on a silver platter. The landscape in Chicago has drastically changed in the last 4 years. Essentially, everything that we were warning about has come to pass. With high property taxes, high cost of living, safety, the schools have just continued to plummet. So, no, I think that if our biggest focus is going to be on voter turnout. I think if we can inspire people to fulfill their constitutional duty and vote, I think we'll win.
There, when with the campaign this time around, right? You had a movement in 2022, right? Your star, really rose in that COVID time with the rebelling against the governor's executive orders and the lawsuits and the masks on the floor and all that stuff, right? You gained a lot of notoriety and a lot of following for it. That stuff is all sort of in the past at this point. And are you concerned that momentum, that movement, that following that you had now 6 years ago, isn't there this time around?
Well, we know that it's there, and it's there even stronger than it has been before, which honestly I am surprised about. No, our movement is intact and it's stronger than it was before. And I think the reason why people are fed up with government, and I mean, 7 months ago, like you said, around that state fair, I had no intention on running. And some people, we felt the calling. Some people began to check in. So we flirted with the idea just to see. One of my campaign advisors said when we started pushing things out there on Facebook, "Hey, Darren, don't be surprised if the movement's not there." And I said, that's all right. That's what I want to know. And when people began to learn that we were running, no, they came on strong. So, I think out of that, that's what people want. They want someone they can trust. And I believe they can trust me, because I've usually did what I said I was going to do. And I tried to do it in a manner to represent the people that I served. But not only that, I'll stand up for what's right. So yes, we had the movement of 22, but today what's right is trying to bring unity. I've got people in my camp that just, want me to punch everybody in the nose and call them out. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I want to bring unity. I want to be the person that stops this divisiveness, brings people to the table and has that conversation. And I believe that with my past working with the legislators on the other side of the aisle, those that are still there that I worked with in the House and the Senate, I believe I have that rapport to make that happen. And gosh, you take a win in November, and when we're able to push J.B. Pritzker aside, these people are going to understand the message that they have to show up and come to the table, because their people, just like everyone else, their constituents are hurting financially, they don't feel safe, and they want better schools. That's going to be the message that is well understood by November 3rd.
You just mentioned crossing the aisle there, right? Do you have examples of that when you were in the General Assembly? Because it didn't seem at the time, and I didn't start the newsletter until 2020, so I wasn't there the entire time that you were there. But certainly, reputationally and anecdotally, et cetera, there weren't a lot of stories of, hey, look at Darren Bailey going to work with the Democrats. So did you actually accomplish anything for your constituents, for the state, by going across the aisle?
I actually did, and interestingly enough, I didn't have to go across the aisle. They came to me. So 2 quick stories, and Tim Butler was Tim Butler. He can relive this. There's one day when Leader Greg Harris came over to the side of the aisle, and Tim stood up and kind of said, well, what can I help you with, Leader? And Greg said, well, I'm not here to see you. I'm here to talk to Bailey. So he pulled me aside, and I had paid several visits with him afterwards. He was working on a pharmaceutical bill, and he couldn't get enough support on his side of the aisle. But one of his staffers had been, evidently they were watching my lives, and he knew that I was concerned and frustrated about the high cost of prescriptions. So he said, I'm just shy on my aisle because, the pharmaceutical lobby was holding that up. So he said, I need some help. And he said, I understand that you have a passion for this too. So you can imagine what that was like in caucus when I stood up and presented this idea that, hey guys, we've got a pretty awesome bill here we need to look at. And anyway, we were able to get Republican support that passed the House. It passed the Senate. J.B. Pritzker refused to sign it. Then another story just comes to mind. Fast forward into the Senate. There was a day on the floor when we were talking about some education bills. I was on the Education Committee. I was also on the Health Committee as a state rep. Senator Pacione-Zayas came over and had a conversation with me, and you can imagine, and that, like I said, these happen several times. Of course, it catches the attention of everybody.
Just for the record, she's Brandon Johnson's chief of staff now. Just talking about the kind of politician you're talking about here.
Yeah, I understand. She was working on a bill because here we are, the aftermath of COVID, and she was working on a bill to allow our 2-year community colleges to be able to offer more hours so that we could get more nurses into the system. And of course, the 4-year universities were fighting this because they wanted all of that. Again, she referenced that I know you're passionate about education. My staffers were watching, and they heard you say something about this. Same thing. I can't get enough support on my side of the aisle. And we did indeed. I went again into the Senate caucus. We had that conversation. It made sense to everyone. Several senators signed on to it, and that bill was passed so that junior colleges, community colleges could put out. So those are just 2 examples. There were other times, and I'd have to go back and get the exact bills. There were some times when I had awesome ideas and I had them down, and I had people come to me and suggest, hey, this isn't going to go anywhere with your name, and it's really a good bill. So why don't you hand it off to somebody else? Well, it had to be handed off to a Democrat. But those are 2 prominent times, and when time allows, sometime we can talk about more.
You have been a noted Trump fan, Trump supporter. You had the president's endorsement in 2022. I'm sure you saw when you went into the suburbs and into the city in 2022, and I would argue it's probably even worse today, that's not the support of someone you particularly want in that neck of the woods. Do you feel like you have to distance your prior support, prior endorsement? Have you sought his endorsement this time around? How do you deal with that? And this isn't Patrick's anecdote, right? The polling shows that Trump's numbers in the city and suburbs are terrible. How do you overcome that, especially with your history with him?
Well, so to purposely distance myself, no. I see as a business person, the tariffs, short-term pain for a long-term gain. As a farmer, these problems that we're suffering and facing, they were already here from the past 4 years, and our past president did nothing to address it. President Trump is addressing these situations. the whole situation with ICE. And I've had a lot of conversations with people in Chicago that, yes, don't like President Trump. And that's the conversation. If I were governor, ICE wouldn't need to be here. If J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson were doing their jobs, it's government's job to protect people, and they're not doing it here in Illinois. So at the federal level, they must come in and do something. So, we wouldn't have any of this nonsense if I were governor. But, yes, I did seek President Trump's endorsement the first round because I was still working hard, trying to get my name ID up to where it needed to be. So we've got that. That's benefiting me greatly. Again, people know who I am. They know what I stand for. And so no, when I have those conversations with people, I want to be governor of Illinois without any influence around me, and whatever that takes. You are correct. It's a shame that it is as divisive as it is, but the fact is it is. So let's just focus on Illinois. That's my conversation when I talk to people where I have this conversation, and it's going to be me. It's going to be the General Assembly and the people that fix the problems here in Illinois.
Since you brought up ICE, I'm going to go down that road. I think it was pretty clear that the actions of ICE and Homeland Security in Chicago, in the suburbs, really riled up a section of the population that isn't normally super engaged, right? They're not sickos like us who live this stuff. The moms in the streets with whistles, and the No Kings protests that had people that had never done anything political in their lives. Again, these are, I think it's okay to go and say, hey, we would work with the federal government to get those, quote, worst of the worst out of here, right? That I don't think anybody opposed that idea from ICE, but then the tactics of picking grandmas up off the street in Little Village and grabbing people outside of a Home Depot, and the way that they handled protesters and the violence. And obviously we saw the Minnesota issues with Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And it seems that too many Republicans have just said, hey, whatever Donald Trump wants. And it's pretty clear that, especially in the northern corner of the state, that they were not happy with what they saw. Were they right? Or was Donald Trump right?
Well, I lay 100% of the responsibility. I lay 100% of the blame for everything that took place at the feet of J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson. I mean, we've heard all the rhetoric about, January 6th several years ago about what they assumed or thought President Trump was saying. There was no mistake what J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson were saying. No mistake whatsoever. These people shouldn't be here. They're invading our city. We need to do something about it. Stand up, protest. That's the rhetoric. That's the dangerous rhetoric that I believe started all of this. Government protects. So J.B. Pritzker held back local and state law enforcement from being able to do their job. So the federal government came in because people's businesses, people's lives, there were problems trying to figure out where these dangerous illegals are at initially, trying to apprehend and bring them in. It could have been so simple. Some of these people were in jail. All they had to do is turn them over. All they had to do is what they're doing right now in Minnesota. We're going to let you know the moment we turn them out the door, and then you can be there to take them into custody. That could have all been worked out, but it wasn't, because J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson decided to go a different route. So that was dangerous, because not only did it put people's lives in, our citizens' lives in danger, but obviously it also put law enforcement's lives in danger. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Number one source of way to destroy a constitutional republic is create lawlessness and do away with law and order. And that is exactly what I see on J.B. Pritzker's agenda.
Let's talk a little policy here. You are running on a Doge style introspection of state spending. Again, that has the connotation of something unpopular from the Trump administration, which may help you in a primary, but probably doesn't help you in a general election. What's the animus behind that? And did somebody say to you, hey, maybe that's not the right wording for a general election if we're going to win this thing?
Yes, actually, that has come to mind, but we've been able to have some really wonderful conversations that you may not like the name, but you're going to love the results. And as time goes on, we get past the primary to be able to ramp up, Department of Government efficiency. Do we intend to go in like the federal government did and clean out positions and departments? No. This is efficiency. This is efficiency in the budget. So what we intend to do is weed out fraud, waste, and corruption in that $56 billion budget, that 5,000 plus page document, and begin to show. I believe that there's a significant amount of money there. People ask, well, how are you going to take care of property taxes and many other issues? I believe we're going to be able to work with as we reappropriate and find money. $2.5 billion last year spent on housing, feeding, and giving illegals insurance. The way that, another thing we're educating people on is just the immense authority that the governor holds in Illinois, which is actually more than any other governor in the nation. We've seen J.B. Pritzker use his executive orders. We've seen how he's, it's the governor who controls the purse strings. And my 17 years on the North Clay School Board, every year we were shorted $200,000 to $500,000. And as a business person, I couldn't understand that until we hired a superintendent who was very active and would go to Springfield and speak at the committee hearings and testify. And then I began to understand as I went a few times that, wow, the governor is actually just reappropriating these funds that were supposed to go to education. And at the end of the year, then when there's not enough money, then you just make cuts. And obviously, townships and schools, well, they can up levies and regain some of that. So that's why our property taxes have gone so high. So every time we turn around, we hear when J.B. Pritzker, when there's a problem and we need more money with mental health. Hundreds of millions of dollars in the last 4 years in the name of mental health, and we have nothing to show for it. No one knows where this marijuana money comes from or where it goes, where it's going to. No one knows where the legalized gambling money comes from or where it goes. That was supposed to be the end-all answer to our schools. Marijuana was supposed to be the end-all answer to mental health. This budget needs to look like a budget, and the people need to be able to see where every dollar goes. And I truly believe, I know half $500,000, $500 million still going to a Lincoln College in Lincoln, Illinois, and it's been closed for 6 years. And then people say, well, no, that money just sets it. No, it doesn't. J.B. Pritzker is able to access that and spend it because it is there as a line item expenditure. People want to know, they want to be satisfied. They kind of like voting, let's just make it where people trust the system. Let's show them where their dollars are coming from. Let's show them where their dollars are going to. That is the Doge that we're talking about.
As we're recording this early Thursday afternoon, the House Revenue Committee has advanced the so-called mega project bill, the one that's designed to give the bears and other large companies in the future some property tax certainty. Obviously, the animus to do it now is the bears and being lured to Indiana. I know you're a long way away from Soldier Field. Maybe you were even a Rams fan when they were here. But this is obviously a huge issue facing the legislature right now. The governor's been pretty consistent in no taxpayer dollars to build a stadium. We'll do some infrastructure work, especially stuff that's already in the Capitol bill, like around Arlington Heights, and has been open to a conversation about property tax certainty. Has he done this right or wrong? Has he approached this right or wrong?
No, this is a conversation that should have been happening for the last several years. And to my understanding, there were attempts made for that. It's embarrassing. This man, it's embarrassing of what's taking place right now. This should have been dealt with before. He's not going to offer any taxpayer funded money towards this because we don't have any to give. And he's got it already committed to special interests within his budget, the stuff that we're going to find in Doge. So, one thing I do know, Chicago and or Illinois cannot afford to lose the Bears. I know that. But if J.B. Pritzker and the legislator would have been more responsible with their money, their spending, and the money that they received over the last 7 years, we should be sitting in the driver's seat instead of Iowa and Indiana, controlling our narrative. But that's not what they desire, and therefore that's why we have the problem that we have. So JB, this is a major, I think. So let's just back up just a little bit, because it's interesting, because the very mechanism that is JB's proposing that we use to keep the bears Well, the General Assembly did that 10 years ago with Boeing. And I believe last October, those tax caps ended. Guess what? Boeing didn't come and ask for an extension or come and ask for any better deals. They packed up and they're moving out. So it's because people are realizing McDonald's, they're packing up their headquarters and they're moving out. People realize the dangerous economic climate here in Illinois. And until they see J.B. Pritzker removed and someone who is fiscal conservative and has common sense working with these numbers taking his place, we're going to be looking at some very bleak days in Illinois.
We've talked a lot about cost of living throughout this campaign and policy wise in the state and federally lately. One of those main drivers in this state is property taxes. Give me a real solution. Give me a real plan to offset the huge cost of property taxes through schools, right? That take up half of our property tax bill. You know, if the state's going to just magically replace that, it's going to cost billions, right? Even if we just eliminate every unfunded mandate, that's not going to make tax bills go down enough to make a real dent statewide. Give me a real solution on how to address property taxes.
Well, it's a multi-attack plan. I found a article the other day that was dated 1921. I got my driver's license in 2021. I got my driver's license in 1986. And since 1986 to 2021, there have been over 700 mandates from state government placed on education, and half of those were unfunded. Now, the kicker is even with the mandates that were funded, most of those expire. So when they expire, schools have to decide, do we continue to do this, or do we not? And they're usually good programs that are in place now. People are hired, people have jobs. You can't just end the program because then you have to place the teacher somewhere. So we've got work to do there with the mandates. Obviously, property taxes have got to be capped. But here's the problem with that. It is the state that dangles right down here in our school district. They just got through building a $3 million gym. And yeah, it's nice. It's exciting to have, but we didn't need a $3 million gym, especially when almost every week, whenever property taxes start getting paid in August, people are finding me on the street or in my office, and they're showing me their tax bill and asking, why did this go up so much? We've got to understand that we've got to live within our means. So many times with the CDB board, big projects, they'll dangle that out to schools, and we all want it. But do we always need it? No. And the state will say, here's $1.5 million, but you've got to come up with the other half. Well, then everybody goes out and sells the project, and then up go your property taxes. So the mandate's got to be brought into order. Local schools need to be deciding how they wanted to educate their children. There must be some immediate work done to cap and stop the 4.9% growth and the bonding that can take place, because although it feels good in your community, it's not working out for us. And then I believe that the money that we find, like I said, you just take the $2.5 billion that was used to help illegal people who are here illegally. I mean, that should have been going to senior citizens. That should have been going to veterans. We got a lot of people here in need. So you begin to find what we have, and in the same way that J.B. Pritzker has reappropriated dollars into wasteful spending, we begin to reappropriate dollars into meaningful spending. So maybe we start working with the schools. We develop a plan to work with the schools and begin to tamp down their need for local revenue. The getting rid of property taxes, you're right, it is not an overnight easy situation. There's serious amount of tax dollars there that have to be replaced, and coming up with figuring out ways to replace that's not going to be easy. But I think with some of these ideas that I gave you, we can begin that process and that work. But Patrick, there's another reason I'm here. Why is a downstate farmer? Why was he able to, win 60-40 over an entrenched Republican leadership, move up into the Senate, and then, be the Republican nominee? It's because they've educated people. It's because that I've, by the grace of God, been able to use social media, that when I saw a problem, when I thought something, I went to the people. And that's the governor's platform, having that and coming up with these with ideas, with solutions for the way things need to be or the way things could be, or pointing out particular legislators on either side of the aisle saying, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish here, but legislator A, B, and C, they're not going for it. Maybe you need to call their office and have a conversation with them and find out why. This ability to communicate, which I'm not contending to be a wonderful orator or communicator, but I've been able to use this social media platform on Facebook, and it's accomplished something, and that's the means, whether it's press conferences every day, whether it's talking to media, talking about these problems, talking about the solutions, and talking about why we need to be working together and who is and who isn't, playing ball with us. I think the people of Illinois want to be educated. When I'm up in your area, everywhere I go, when I ask people who their state rep and their state senator is, I'm going to say 90% don't know. If they spit out a name, it's a congressperson, and most of the time it's a wrong congressperson if that congressperson isn't even still serving. So educating people on government as governor and giving them some ownership and giving them a role in the process, I think is vital.
All right, I've kept you over time. I've got one last thing before I let you go, if you're okay with that. And I think it's just the overarching question, right? It's about viability. We saw the results in 2022. You're raising less money this time around than you did then. In fact, less than a good state rep campaign in the bank at the start of the year. There's a built-in perception that the guy with the Southern Illinois drawl is still not going to connect with the suburbanites. And JB Pritzker has more money in his couch cushions than you or I are ever going to see in our lives. What should give people any belief that this time it's going to be different, that this time you can actually win if the polls are telling us the truth, you're likely to win the nomination?
Well, first of all, I'm a farmer, so I'm used to working against adversity. I did that all of my life, and I've certainly did that in Springfield. Let's not discount the fact that all we have to do is look back at the days of a candidate, Abraham Lincoln, and see the times that he lost and what he did. And it's interesting because he was chastised for the exact same thing. In those days, his Kentucky accent. Don't discount the fact that Ronald Reagan, a California movie star, had the same drama. I'm not worried about that a bit. I think people are going to be kind of excited and surprised when they see the fundraising that's taking place right now. Business is picking up. Again, the simple fact that I am the late entrant to the race, and I announced 2 days after one of the other competitors received some funding from two of my donors. The fact that locked up and they haven't got a penny since, I think that's very telling. So let's let the people decide. I work hard, and I don't think anybody has. It's been a long time. I heard a lot about the walker who walked across the state, but I think it's been a long time since anyone can claim they've put the time and the energy that I've put into this, and I'm going to the people. So rather than money, rather than just whatever it is, the dialogue, whatever, I want to get in front of the people. There's doors opening in Chicago just this past weekend of minority groups. People came to me that I did not have. They knew of me 4 years ago, but they're just now stepping up, and there's infrastructure to work with groups of people that I did not have access to 4 years ago. I'm really very excited about the connections that we're making, the money that will come, and not only that, but just getting out and this Get Out to Vote initiative that we're going to be implementing soon. I believe is going to work because Illinois cannot afford another 4 more years of JB Pritzker. We all know that on day one, that man's going to start running for president. And what he's going to do is showcase what is going to take place in the next year and a half of his term if he wins in November. And all he has to do is take this example of what he's done to Illinois, to California, Colorado, New Jersey, New York, and we could be looking at our next president. So I think we've got an opportune time to stop that dead in its tracks, and I personally believe we will.
Former Senator Darren Bailey, Republican candidate for governor. Senator, thanks for taking some time. We appreciate it. I know you've got a busy day, and wish you luck and the best over the next 2+ weeks until Election Day.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. And I just might have to subscribe to the Illinoize. I haven't done so yet. So
What have you been waiting for, man?
I get the free version. God
Come
bless
on.
you, friend.
Come
Thank
on.
you.
Thanks to Senator Bailey for taking time. Here's our conversation with Ben Szalinski of Capital News Illinois that we taped Friday morning. Let's turn now to our friend Ben Szalinski, reporter for Capital News Illinois, coming live from the Capitol basement with the 100-and-some-year-old bricks behind him. Ben, thanks for taking time. You've had a busy couple of weeks. Let's start with the Bears. We've had these competing bills this week in Indiana and in Illinois. I have some Indiana legislative background in my life, and kind of not surprised to see how that played out. Though I think it's going to be interesting when the people who live in the Northwest Indiana area and get their news from Chicago TV and not from the Indianapolis State House reporters find out what kind of tax increases are part of this. And then, of course, you see Illinois with this pilot bill, the payment in lieu of taxes for some property tax certainty for the Bears gets through committee, but certainly doesn't look like a done deal by any means. How up in the air is this right now?
Honestly, it feels really up in the air. Basically that, it's kind of up to the Bears at this point, what they want to do. How much patience do they have for Illinois lawmakers to wait? And, do the Bears need to get something done here in the next couple of weeks, or are they willing to potentially wait this out 3 more months for Springfield to finish, deciding how they're going to help the team? So, yeah, the whole thing feels very up in the air, but honestly, Indiana passing this legislation, I feel like helps out a little bit. It gives us some certainty about where things are standing in that state. So Illinois lawmakers can, kind of use that as a benchmark to try and match up to something like that. So, it's a good question, I think, where exactly this is going to go. But, I think for now, over the next 2 weeks, it's going to be kind of chill, and we're just going to have some time to take this in. I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of news here, until the House is back.
It certainly seems that, right, even if they get a deal done on what this pilot bill looks like, it's the same issue that you and I have talked about on the radio for months now, that you've got to get 30 or so Chicago Democrat state legislators, even more than that if you count the ones that have a part of the city in their district, to vote for a bill that allows the Bears to leave the city of Chicago. That, to me, especially when you add the speaker's 60 vote minimum, 60 Democrat minimum sort of unwritten rule to put a bill on the floor, it makes it seem like it's going to be a really hard task to get this done. Even if they get a deal to get to 60 in the House, feels like a real mountain to climb.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Every Democrat from Chicago is not a no vote. We know that because 2 of the main sponsors of this bill are from Chicago. But I guess that being said, these Chicago Democrats are looking to get something out of this. And that's, so the city's not just left on the hook with, renovation debt for Soldier Field that the Bears aren't even using anymore, because the team was the one who asked for that 25 years ago. So, I don't know how much all that's going to eventually move the needle. If that stuff isn't present in the bill, if that, basically prevents anybody else from Chicago from getting on board, or if that stuff gets into the bill, how many other Chicago Democrats are going to come across and support the legislation. It's a tricky situation to, be a Chicago lawmaker and take a vote that would ultimately help the Bears leave the city. But, I think one of the things that is going to be the point that's going to be made by supporters of the legislation, potentially by the governor's office, is at this point, you're taking kind of 2 votes. If you support this, you're taking a vote that could potentially help the Bears stay in Illinois. If you don't support it and this bill never ends up passing, that, no vote is ultimately potentially going to help the Bears move to Indiana. But the other side of that coin is, if you're a South suburban lawmaker or South Side lawmaker from Chicago, the Bears moving to Hammond is probably a little bit more beneficial for your district than it is for, the Bears moving to Arlington Heights and staying in the state.
It's interesting on the renovation dollars that remain out there. And Cam Buckner, who's the actual sponsor of the bill that moved through the House this week, said, the Bears essentially need to pay for that remaining debt. It's almost it's around $500 million at this point from a renovation that was done. Were you even born when it started?
I was.
Okay.
I was.
Barely born, probably still in diapers when it was, Ben's young. I make fun of him for it all the time. But I mean, it's old debt, but it's also, there's a city of Chicago tie here that if the hotel motel tax that's dedicated to paying down that those bonds doesn't meet it, that comes out of their LGDF. So you have long-term implications for city of Chicago funding that may disappear in a city that already has no money to do anything more than keep the lights on at this point. So that's another really tricky component of this.
Yeah, and I think one of the points though that some folks are going to make is, just because the Bears leave Soldier Field doesn't mean Soldier Field is dead. The Bears are at Soldier Field at best 10 times a year, and that's when the team is good. So, there's going to be other events that are going to go to Soldier Field. The concerts are still going to come, is what I think a lot of people are hoping for. There's going to be other types of events, other football games. Soccer is going to be something that you're probably going to see even more of at the stadium if the Bears leave. But I think also that one of those concerns is if you're building this world-class stadium in Arlington Heights, a good hour out of the city, depending on traffic in some cases, those events are going to also move out of Chicago. People are going to go hold those massive concerts in the wintertime in January and February indoors at, Arlington's new stadium. And I think there's some fears that some of these big events are, going to bring more business to the suburbs than they would to the city of Chicago, because Arlington Heights is not, it's not far from Chicago, but it's not right on top of the city either. So, when the Super Bowl comes, people are probably going to be staying around that area more and more out in the suburbs. So, then that hotel revenue is not also going back to pay back the debt for Soldier Field, which currently does. So, that's, I think, one of the things that's just complicating this, the fear of, some of that tax revenue that Chicago already gets to help pay for Soldier Field is going to be leaving anyways with some of those big events that are also leaving.
Don't worry, the TV network people would still stay at the Peninsula or something because they've got all the big money. If you've stuck around this long in the podcast, you stuck through the Darren Bailey interview, and you have done a series in Capital News Illinois where you've talked to all four of the Republican candidates for governor. We're scheduled to talk to Ted Dabrowski next week. The Heidner campaign is leaving me on unread at this point, even though they agreed to an interview last fall. So we'll see if anything changes there. Let me start with Darren Bailey. Is this new and improved, softer, gentler, kinder teddy bear Darren Bailey? Is this real, or is this just the same old guy who's trying to sound a little nicer?
I think on the policy front, it's the same guy. We're not really hearing anything new from him that is not, the strong conservative that he is. I mean, he is unapologetically one of the most conservative lawmakers in the state, or former lawmakers in the state. And he's not changing that. He's not softening up his positions. But I think, as he was telling you, the way he's trying to reach people is different. He is trying to come off as a more approachable guy. He's talking about a lot about uniting people. And I think he kind of admitted to you that he, didn't really do a lot of that in 2022. So he's trying to kind of, I guess, pick up maybe on some of those personality mistakes, I guess, that he thinks he made back, 4 years ago. But I mean, ultimately, policy wins at the end of the day, I think, especially in Illinois. And when you're, a hard conservative facing off against a progressive governor in a state that leans Democrat, that progressive governor is going to win pretty much every time. So, unless Darren found a way to move to the middle and somehow got rid of all these positions he's had for so long and he's known for, he's going to have a really, really hard time, even if he is coming off more approachable to voters.
Right. I think like the abortion bill, and I didn't talk about it with Bailey, but like the Neil Anderson abortion, basically making an abortion illegal in Illinois, and he also has a companion bill that would reinstitute the death penalty in the state. So of course you that TV ad writes itself, right? Neil Anderson wants, and Republicans want to, send mothers to death row after they have an abortion, right? That's not stuff that plays well in the suburbs. And in 2022, I think Darren Bailey probably either doesn't say anything about that bill or is tacitly in support of it. I thought it was a really smart political move for him, a guy who says, hey, look, I'm pro-life, but this isn't the right way to do it. I thought that was a smart political move out of him, and it might show some growth. But again, I mean, when I pressed him just a little bit on ICE, and he fell right back into those Trump talking points. I pressed him just a little bit. I didn't even press hard, right? I just pressed a little bit on property taxes. It was pretty clear that there's no plan there. Right. So it does, if we're looking at this as here's Darren Bailey's real 15-point plan to turn Illinois around, there's not the sort of depth there that maybe they're trying to project.
Yeah. And I think, that could be part of the problem. And what Darren's going to need to do a whole lot more of here, assuming he moves past the primary, he's going to need to really come up with a lot stronger positions that, voters in Chicago and the suburbs are going to be able to support. I mean, the ICE issues is a big deal for people in the Chicago area. They have seen firsthand all this stuff that, maybe a lot of us have only seen on TV or the internet. A lot of these people in the Chicago area, they've seen it on their own streets. They've seen
the ICE issue motivated suburban women maybe more than, maybe the Dobbs decision, but there weren't people in the streets after the Dobbs decision, right? I mean, it could have, or January 6th, right? It has motivated and charged up suburban and Chicago women voters specifically more than maybe we've seen in our lives.
Yeah. And, one of the things J.B. Pritzker talks a lot about is, the threat of a militarized police force walking around our streets. And, in Chicago, we've seen that. I mean, that's kind of the way that ICE and the Border Patrol came off. And, the governor is going to continue to talk about that. And it's going to be probably one of the main points of his campaign is these threats to democracy that, we've already seen happen in Chicago. And, I think Darren Bailey's going to have a hard time unless he can kind of come up with maybe an answer that recognizes, I think, a lot of the fear that folks in the Chicago area have, because, there's been American citizens who have been caught up in this stuff because, of how they look in a lot of cases. So, Darren Bailey blames a lot of it on, the state sanctuary policies. He blames it on the governor, the mayor, but, in the suburbs, I don't think that is something people are thinking about. Nobody's blaming it on Brandon. Nobody in the suburbs is, saying Brandon Johnson is, part of what's happening in my community. So, I think that message really only goes so far because he's going to need to recognize, I think, that people in the suburbs are very concerned about this issue. And that's where he needs to improve his performance if he wants to have a shot at this.
I'm not going to dirty the pool before we have Dabrowski on, or if Heidner decides to do the show, but I am interested in your impressions of those guys. Certainly the polling shows that this is Bailey is the clear favorite, and I don't know that the other guys are even accepting that premise, but what were your impressions of seriousness and unseriousness out of them?
Yeah, I think he came off pretty serious about this. He legitimately thinks he's, the best Republican for this. The only person who might have a chance to beat J.B. Pritzker and pick up more suburban voters, especially compared to Darren Bailey. Ted's definitely approaching this race in that way. I think he's struggled a little bit just on, I guess maybe meeting voters where they're at or
connecting is the word.
With voters. Yeah. Ted's a very, very smart guy. He's a researcher. He knows some of these stats, right off the top of his head. And it's certainly good. It shows up his intelligence, but I think sometimes it's hard for voters to understand that stuff. He has a lot of press conferences with charts and other things. He talks a lot about things that I find really interesting, but maybe the average voter doesn't, because there are taxes and revenue issues and there's bar charts involved. And I think that's
and you're a big nerd.
Right. And I think that might be one of the big struggles of his campaign, is he needed to work a little bit more on getting down to people who don't follow politics as closely as you and I do. Rick Heidner, I think, I don't know that a lot of voters in the state still know who he is. He hasn't gotten out there a lot, and talking to him, we talked about some various, issues. I was, when I talked to him, I was really just trying to get to know him. What is his policy positions? He's a complete newcomer on this. So, we talked a lot about maybe his motivation to get in this race. And he sometimes answered those questions talking about, various business struggles he's had with the state of Illinois, and problems getting a racino built in the south suburbs that ultimately JB Pritzker's Illinois Gaming Board blocked. So he talked a lot about that as far as maybe some of his motivation. But I also asked another question about why downstate voters, rural voters, farmers should support his campaign, and he talked about his background in horse racing. I don't know how much that translates to, the corn and soybean farmers that are very prevalent throughout the state. And, horse racing is kind of another industry. It's kind of a wealthy industry. So, I think if he's going to make a push in this race, he's got a lot of work to do to kind of just get his name out there first off, but also, tell people what he believes in and actually relate with voters, outside wealthier communities.
I also believe in one interview he referred to the racino that they wanted to build in Tinley Park is in Southern Illinois. So that's probably not a great way to connect with downstate in a Republican primary. Ben Szalinski, Capital News, Illinois. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your work as always. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Thanks to our guests, Darren Bailey, the Republican candidate for governor, and Ben Szalinski of Capital News, Illinois. We're going to try and do a show a week leading up to the primary at least, and have candidates and guests and important things to talk about with what's going on the ballot between now and March 17th. It's going to be a wild couple of weeks. Thanks for taking time. We'll talk to you next time on the Illinoize podcast.